This problem can only be solved if we think about it differently, if we think in terms of distributed ledgers. That we need to provide stability at the same time as we need to be agile. To me, it struck the right balance between the pragmatism of the business world with some ideas of that there is a vision to how things could be different.
Do you think if Hedera Hashgraph didn't exist, would you, and you had to pick another project, would you be on one? And if so, what would it be?
But you tell me one I could be on.
Well,
you're the expert. You tell me which
well,
one I could be
it depends what you mean by on.
Yeah.
I mean, which would you be looking at and be interested in? Are there any out there, Ripple, for example, or Quant? It would be another great example.
There are lots of projects I would love to engage with, as that would then be as an individual consultant.
Yes.
The point is that there wouldn't be, in my view, there wouldn't be any other project where LSE could sign up for a council.
Because of the environmental
no, but
aspect?
Because most of them don't have an orchestrated council governance. They have various kinds of advisors and
sorry. What I mean is, I don't mean as a governing council member. I mean as an institution, you want to engage and you want to teach about cryptographic technology.
Yes.
Hedera Hashgraph doesn't exist. Which one is it that you're talking about all the time?
No. But so then I'm completely, in that sense, I'm completely agnostic.
Right. Okay.
Completely agnostic. I mean, there are lots of interesting projects. They each have interesting flavors. I think, to be a little bit nationalistic, and the MakerDAO out of Copenhagen, I think, is very interesting. Because
right, okay.
They have gone through a decentralization round and increasingly giving up the centralization of the governance even. But so for me, I think what's mostly interesting is the technological development enable a new kind of architectural arrangement. That's what that allows new kinds of innovation. That's what I'm interested in.
Yes.
And so the idea of having a two-tier system where you have stability of the value of the coin because it's automatically regulated through incentives, I think is very, very interesting. I think one of the most interesting things to come is, of course, what's called GovCoins or central bank digital currencies.
Yes.
And all the problems associated with that and how to square that circle.
Yes.
And should they outsource to the railways of the layer 1 protocol, or should they all run their own centralized database? The way to look at it practically, the only reason that we are seriously engaged with Hedera is because they were looking for council members that are institutions that sign up to the LLC that runs Hedera as a digital cooperative. That's the reason. To my knowledge, nobody else does exactly that. I can't join Ethereum's council. I can't join Ripple's council.
No.
They might need advisors, and I would advise anybody who were a reputable outfit. I wouldn't advise a decentralized exchange in some place where it's a little bit iffy.
Well, you couldn't because you don't know who else is participating. Yeah.
But the point is, I think for me, what's really interesting is that essentially a computer scientist, is the evolution of the architectural arrangements and what kind of arrangements, business arrangements on top that facilitates. That's really interesting because you could say if we just, at the inception, Bitcoin was thought to solve a certain problem. It just happened to be that there was the libertarians who wanted a deflationary currency. They hated Bretton Woods, and the cypherpunks who just wanted to do pairwise, like peer-to-peer exchange, and they met and was a holy alliance, and then they split when Bitcoin Cash split. But the point is here that when Vitalik saw that, and he thought, you can't do smart contracts. He'd read Szabo's paper, Nick Szabo's paper from '97. He thought, you can't do smart contracts. Okay, what do we do then? We invent a new one. And of course, then Lehman comes around and says, well, this is no good because of gas fees. Well, we can do other things. And I'm absolutely sure there'll be others after that do new protocols that enable a certain kind of behavior.
Yes.
And you could say, like, it's obvious that you have permissionless public and you have permission private. These are in the extreme ends, and it makes no sense for the world shipping companies to have a permissionless public ledger. Why? No. They just want to keep track of something internally.
Yeah, internally as well. Yeah.
The point is there, once you think, okay, what if you want to make money digital without directly involving the private banks? You know, we had a project, a Swedish student I had, she did a master's dissertation on the e-krona project in Sweden, like actually 3 or 4 years ago. And it was like, they suddenly realized, okay, but should we then be a bank with a checking account for every Swede? Ooh, that's a bit, like, so suddenly all these questions for
you accidentally fall into these boxes,
And then you think, okay, what if we have a no limit to the deposit and there's a run on the private banks? We will facilitate a run on those banks. You think, what do I want to do? Have my money in a private bank or in this? No, I'm going to go with the national bank.
National bank, because
So all of these issues, and I think that's where we are already with Hedera, this idea, the things you can do now, ask questions that are in between. That are not obviously either corporate networks internally or between companies or just...
It's not closed and it's not decentralized in the sense that no one's in charge.
The network is open. At some point people will be able to stake towards it. All of these things, very interesting.
How do you think the Great British Pound or the digital dollar or whatever, how will that, in your mind, how will that happen? I think we can both agree that it's going to happen. It has to happen. That all world currencies will go digital. Do you think that the United Kingdom will have a digital pound on a platform that doesn't yet exist, or do you think it will be a case of we will piggyback off Hedera or build on top of on a layer one? How do you think it'll?
So the now departed Donald Rumsfeld, he talked about the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the
unknown unknowns. Yeah.
So for me, this is an unknown unknown because it's like you can think about a number of scenarios.
Yes.
Maybe it's a known unknown.
It's a known unknown. I would
think about a number of scenarios, but which one is be chosen and what configuration, we don't know yet. We don't even actually know whether it will ever happen because you could.
Really?
We are not quite sure. So the point is there. You can look at, okay, so first of all, I have to acknowledge to all my colleagues here who are experts in economics and finance, I am neither.
Right.
Okay, so I am a humble computer scientist who's trying to understand this from a perspective of innovation and computational architectures and cryptography.
Yes.
And from that perspective only. I have a pedestrian, when I'm an economist, then it's The Economist.
Yes.
I read every week.
Okay.
So that's my knowledge of it. I've read
okay,
books
let me
on
ask
money.
you the same question in a different way. What would be the practical way of, what's the best practical way of facilitating a digital pound?
Well,
with what we have today.
Yes.
What are the known knowns?
So the point is there, like the first decision, which seems to be, as I've read these white papers and all of these on the digital dollar and others, and there is a huge difference between whether this is a B2B or B2C and C2C. So you can think about
all of the above, I think.
But you can think about a digital pound or a digital dollar that is only on the wholesale level.
Yeah.
That this is just like the fractional reserve, the settlement,
the moving of monies, at a national level. Yes.
Or even an international level. You can have a global stable coin.
The IMF okay.
You can think about that, and to me, that makes a lot of sense from a computational point of view, not from a finance point of view.
I get that, yeah. It actually makes sense to me from a political point of view because I think there's growing pressure on the world reserve currency being the United States dollar because it's no longer pegged to the pound, obviously, Bretton Woods, and because of the way the world is changing in terms of superpowers and China's power and things. And the only way I can't see America giving up. We've got a bit on a tangent, I appreciate, but I can't see America easily giving up its currency as the world reserve currency, and I can't also see the countries continuing to price petroleum and other things in the US dollar. So what's the easiest out for everyone? It's to use the technology as an excuse to have a world reserve currency, and the world reserve currency would be. It's nothing to no one, so therefore no one is offended. It's not that America is stepping down, it's just that it's changing.
That's not only finance and economics, there's also politics.
Politics,
even more naive. So
I just can't see America saying to China, okay, your turn. And I can't see China continuing to accept the United States dollar as the world reserve currency. So in my very small mind, an obvious out would be them all getting together and saying, actually, we're going to have a world reserve currency. It makes sense from your point of view in terms of the practicalities of doing it. but it also saves face.
Yeah. So, but the question is then, okay, so if you look at, like, a good example is the internet. We've all agreed on having an open internet, except some countries that wanted, like China, that wants an intranet that is much more centralized, because the traffic internally is vastly bigger than the traffic across the borders. But you look at, Vint Cerf, who I had the great pleasure of having dinner with at a Google event many years ago, 10 years ago or so, or 8 years ago in Paris. He was the inventor or co-inventor of the IP protocol. He had, back in the day, he had a project to try and situate the root node for the open internet in Switzerland, so it was neutral.
Yes.
But he's now in his retirement, I think, an advisor for Google, and so he's no longer keen on that. But irrespective of that, it just fell completely deaf ears. So America owns the internet.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The root node, like it is in America, because they invented it, so they own it.
Yes.
Like in the UK, we own the ability to have stamps that doesn't say UK on, but just has the Queen's face on.
Yes.
Because we in our large
the collective we,
back in the day invented it.
Yes.
The point is here, I don't see, like, so how would we reach an agreement on this? That would be my problem. But I would say, so this is way beyond.
It's the triangle, isn't it? That's right. That you said.
Yes.
That would be the fundamental layer, I think.
There would have to be a significant pressure.
Community would be an interesting one.
That's right. But there would have to be a significant pressure, and it would have to be driven by some super national level like the IMF or something. Yes. The point is here, I think from a managerial point of view, or from a computer science point of view, architectural point of view, I would say, it seems to me most obvious that you would use rails that are already there.
Yes.
And that could be multiple rails, but the whole idea that you would have in the US of all places, that you would have the federal banks, the central banks of each of the states would have their own joint centralized system, because it would, if they want to do their own, it would be centralized. But they would then be a bank. They would be operationally a bank.
Yes, yeah.
They would not be responsible for the creation of money through loans. Mm-hmm. They would not only be the central, like the commercial banks. They would have to be. It would be like the Bank of England or the Federal Reserve would have to then
in each of their respective states. Yeah.
And I don't see that happen. Okay. I would see you would outsource it to commercial entities. That would be the thing you would do in America.
Okay.
But from a pure practical point of view, but that's again, to go back to Andrew Marr, that politics stays the same.
Yes.
So politics sometimes make decisions that you can think they're not the most obvious ones, but there might be a reason for it.
Yeah.
That's just somehow.
Again, it's taking into the unintended consequences, isn't it? And that's why sometimes decisions on their own don't look like they make any sense. Yeah. But actually, it's the wider picture that has to be considered.
So I think if something is happening, it'll be in the medium term, because I think for me the practicalities of doing it are quite daunting, because we have an existing system of private banks that, for better or for worse, works as it does.
Yes, yes. It's the worst fare system we have. Just touching on, we're talking now in DeFi, decentralized finance and banking. Do you have any opinions on the SEC and Ripple case? Do you know anything about it? Do you look at it? No?
I have to start everything by saying, I'm looking in the camera saying, I acknowledge I'm not an expert in this. Because this is way beyond, I'm just
asking, I'm asking your personal opinion.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Well, so all I know about it is you have the Howey test.
Yes.
And if you go through that, no blockchain will pass the Howey test.
No.
So then, the
rest is politics and opinion.
Yeah, so the point is there. And so I have, from a computer science point of view, I have very strong opinions on this, which is any other asset class you have that you can invest in, you can put in a cubby hole. Okay, so it's gold. Okay, it's gold. You have a gold bar. Yeah, you have bullion. There you go. Yeah. Or it's a share in a firm that has an economic activity that might give you some money later on, or the share might increase in price. Or it's a bond. It might be a government bond. The country needs money. It issues a bond. You get a stable return on that. The problem you have is, and this is really my core expertise, is I'm just telling you, Max, whenever things have 0 and 1s in it, You cannot hold them in your hands. They can go it becomes unknown unknowns. So let's imagine that we together start, we start a blockchain project based on Hedera. And so we have our own coin on top of the H-bar. And we then want to get money for that, so we have an ICO, which is basically the opposite of an IPO.
Yes.
So we just basically get the money up front. It's crowdsourcing. It's like Kickstarter. So we have a Kickstarter campaign, and then we get all the money. And then the question is that a security or not? That depends. That's all you can say.
Yes.
So people who buy it, they can all say, no, it's utility coin, because once Max and Carsten start their startup, we can then use it to access those services, because as the rule is, if you ain't paying for it, it's not running on a blockchain.
Yeah.
Like it only runs on a blockchain if you end up paying and potentially get money out. If you
there has to be a transaction. Yes, transactional. Yes.
Yeah, it's transactional. Otherwise, you would not. You just have it in a central database. So the point is here that what they claim to be a utility coin. If you're in Denmark, all cryptographic tokens in Denmark are securities.
Right.
Yeah, they've just decided. Because the one thing they know better than anything else is how to tax. Yeah. They are very good at taxing. Yeah. So this is the easiest way of saying it. Whereas, of course, the Swiss came out very early with the classification. The point is they're like zombies. They are one thing, and then or shapeshifters or whatever from whatever Marvel universe, and suddenly they can turn into. I know it was a utility coin, but hey, now it's like when the politicians in Britain, they swap their properties. Yes. Oh no, this is my primary one now. Not this. What do you mean? No. So here, these tokens, they can completely change shape, depending on what, because they're digital. Yeah. You can't assign them to anything particular. No. And that means that they are very difficult to legislate on unless you're very specific about what you do. Because you can't pigeonhole them, and even if you could, they can just move. They can just change. Yeah, we do something different now. So this is the whole point. Okay. Is there, you just politically decide, are they securities or not? And the point is there. What you can say is there will always be regulatory divergence. Yeah. So in particular, post-Brexit Britain, there might be some compelling reasons why we here want to be Singapore on Thames. We're going to be Singapore on Thames. The point is here, the Singapore on Thames is really, what I meant by that is that it is not likely that all the world's countries or the majority of the Western world are all going to agree on one regulatory regime. Yeah. Nobody will ever agree on the Danes that everything is just like... we can't agree on what the best wine is. We can't agree... So there will be regulatory divergence. That means for some countries there'll be an advantage in being very open to experimentation. So generally, in the world of innovation, for things, you need to be very tender and caring about new innovations and don't crush them with regulation straight away, because they never... Like, we could have stopped the internet. You don't know what it is yet. You have to see what they become, and then... You need to allow it to be a little bit wild and crazy and have its teenage years and say, F you, and flip you the bird, and then you think, okay, and then you start reining it in once it starts being a systemic risk. Yes. And I think in terms of DeFi, I think my clear opinion on that is also theoretically informed that the way it is now cannot continue. Okay. Categorically not. Because there's a now unfortunately deceased sociologist called Charles Perrow, who I had the great pleasure of having lunch with many years ago, where he commented one of my papers because he was visiting here. But he wrote a book called Normal Accidents, and it has on the front the Challenger explosion, the tragic explosion of the Challenger space ferry. And he argued basically as a 2x2. There's a business school, 2x2. Yes. So you have, on the one dimension, you have systems that are loosely coupled and tightly coupled. On the other dimension, you have systems that are linear and systems that are non-linear, so simple and complex. Yes. And he says, in the top right-hand corner, systems that are highly tightly coupled, but also highly complex. And highly complex means that a small thing can have a great effect. Right. These systems are where you call normal accidents. You will have accidents. Of course. Nuclear power plants. A small thing, big effect. A tiny thing. So these rubber seals on the... Yeah, a crack in a reactor. All of this. So he was, Chernobyl. Co-author of the 3 Mile Island nuclear disaster in America. He was one of the people who studied this. And so the point is there, I think this idea of very fast making automatic agreements with each other about very complex arrangements that are financial of nature,
yes.
It creates the scenario for things to be unpredictably blowing up in our face very quickly. And I can't see why DeFi won't have that problem.
How does that, do you think, best guess, and of course you can't predict the future, but how do you think that plays out? Is it a few big things go really wrong and then there's regulation, or do you think it won't come to that? Do you think that regulation will catch up? Or
I don't know.
Because the tech is undeniable. That's one thing we do know. The tech is undeniable.
Yeah.
So we're all better off using it. So how?
No, we are not all better off using it all the time. But we can identify some clear use cases. Well, that's exactly the point. So you could say, okay, so let's look at it from a single trading desk point of view. So there used to be a time, so I supervised a PhD who studied foreign exchange traders that used mobile terminals and how fantastic it was, and it was distributed and all sorts of stuff. The point is there, when you go from having humans in the loop constantly to try and adjust to having less and less humans in the loop,
yes.
Then you rely on there not to be any errors in any programs, any unanticipated consequences. And I've been a computer scientist for 35 years, so I know you cannot rely on computer programs not having any errors in them. And that's from the simple fundamental assumption or observation that you can have two different kinds of systems where computers software is in a third category that's just the worst. So you can either have discrete systems or continuous systems. And the discrete systems, you might not be able to count all of the possibilities, but there's not that many. So it's like you have some logistics. You have only a finite number of states that these elements can be in your supply chain. Or you can have continuous, like circuit boards, they are continuous arrangements. But so they are really hard to deal with because they have infinite states. But you can then use differential equations to model these in like Fourier transformations or other mathematical constructs to just model all the behavior across all eventualities of the system. So this is really easy. You have either discrete or continuous. What you have in computer science, as Frederick Brooks Jr. said back in the 70s, he said, well, computer programs are finite, but there are more states than you can ever hope. You can actually,
you can't even comprehend.
The Alan Turing and Turing theorem is you cannot fundamentally prove that a given software program will always halt. That you can't, because there's such a large combination of input and processing and output that you cannot test it comprehensively. So the way you test software is you test it long enough and you that's good enough. That's good enough.
Right. Okay.
And so the point is that
which is fine for most things, but then
you look at how Apple has tried to lock down the iPhone and stop people sideloading apps on it. And we studied that in great detail. Apple can still not stop people sideloading if they want.
And they own the software.
And they own the software, and they control it.
And the whole process. They still can't.
There will always be some sort of vulnerability. And so the problem you have is when you then rely on the dictum that code is law and law is code, so we should just completely codify everything so it becomes automatic, and you just put your money on this node, and then you get a return, 5% every year or whatever, and you can lend there and collateralize it. You just look at any of the crypto YouTube channels and say how you move money about, and suddenly you get more money out of it. So there's some punching going on, or there's something that's not sustainable. Who's paying that, like
132% API?
All of
nonsense.
That. All of that. So the point is there. This is just a new bubble.
Yes.
To me, as an outsider.
No,
I don't know it.
I completely agree.
For a fact. But the point is there. It doesn't mean that the fundamental technology is not good. It doesn't mean that there's not part of it that's excellent. But the point is here, human folly.
I mean, the yields it's a zero-sum game. Someone's paying them somewhere. So and it's non-sustainable.
Well, you can say it's not a zero-sum game. So you could say, how does money appear? Well, it appears when I go into a bank as a poor academic. I want to borrow money, otherwise I can't afford a house. So that then money is created. It's in the same way as...
Yes, sorry, what I mean is the return is a zero-sum game.
Exactly.
You're paying a return on that money, and if you're paying 132% a year, it's a craziness, yeah.
But of course, you could say when Mance and Lehman pressed the button on the laptop and created 50 billion H-bar, they created money.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So that was another, you can say, fractional reserve.
Well, it's only when we start to see the value in it that it becomes...
But the point is exactly... So
they can press the button as many times as they like, but if nobody else is in on it...
That's right. So the whole point of it is you could say that pressing that button is a promise of economic activity over time. So it's the same as issuing a share.
Yes.
It's the same as an IPO.
It's the birth of a child. It's just, yes.
So it is not a zero-sum game at that level.
No.
But my worry is, of course, that once you start having automatic trading in foreign exchange trading desk or automatic trading of shares, so you have like whatever Black Tuesday or whatever Black Thursday.
Yeah, the glitch.
Where suddenly the algorithm makes the decision. So this is fundamentally an AI problem.
And it's funny that because we see it differently. When I say we're all better off DeFi and decentralized, I see cryptographic technology as more as a software, and I don't comment on whether or not people should be taken more or added to the equation. I just see that the petrol in the engine is different, the fuel is different, and that is a better fuel than the fuel we currently have. So for me, if that is the case and that is true, if that is correct, then all systems should be running on that fuel, in my mind. Whether we add or take people out of the system is a completely different conversation. What I mean personally when I say I think that all systems should be run on Hedera Hashgraph, what I don't necessarily mean, I'm not commenting on human versus machine or automation. I'm just talking about the software and that it runs on.
I disagree.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a very interesting article in one of our magazines. It's not an academic, but it's a really nice article about, it's by a bunch of Danish academics. It's about the shipping register and how to decentralize. And it ends up with a 10-stage decision model for whether you should have a blockchain or not.
Okay.
And the first 7 questions that are asked basically said, no, you don't need a block. You don't need a block. So the point is, I would say it
right. So you've got to get it past 7 no's before it makes sense.
The point is there. So
what, can you give me an example?
So the whole idea is, if you are quite happy with a centralized database, if you can all agree on having a central database. So I don't remember them offhand, but the basic idea, the way to turn it around is to say, you know, Max, you should only have a distributed ledger if there is no other way you can do it, because it is such a cumbersome and expensive solution. So it's the same. In organizational theory terms, there's Mintzberg's book, Structures in 5, or Structure in 5, so I think it's called. That basically, you can basically say, the best way of running any kind of organization is centralization and standardization.
Yes.
That's by far the best. Max decides everything. Any decision goes via Max, much better. Like, decisions are consistent.
Dictatorship,
You're run by, you have a principle, you run by that stone hard. That's probably how you run your business, and I would imagine. But the point is there, environmental uncertainty means we can't. So you have the rule of law. You have the rule of law in any country. And then you have somebody allegedly commits a crime somewhere in the other end of the country than London. And you need to think, okay, how are we going to decide what judgment should fall upon this poor sod who's allegedly committed a crime? Well, we need to have a specialist lawyer who helps and judges a whole system to interpret the law into this particular case, because it's too complicated. So the point is here, you can say digital, distributed ledgers should only be used if we cannot in any way, shape or form solve it in any other way. And that, to me, is the key use cases, at least immediately, are inter-organizational, where you want multi-party, inter-organizational value exchanges. Extremely useful. Logistics, financing of trade finance, all of these things.
Can you give me an example, a real-world use example, that you don't think would benefit from cryptographic technology?
Well, so exactly, if in the UK we decide we want to have a digital pound, and the Bank of England is quite happy having a data center that might be outsourced to a combination of Amazon and IBM and Microsoft, and we would just have that in a sensible way, secure in a sense, so we just become, the Bank of England becomes one of the banks. Like, why would we want to have all the mess to have a distributed ledger? it would leave a lot of people screaming, saying, but it is not the guy from Coin Bureau. Of course, he would not like it. And I would probably not like it either.
No.
But on the other hand, you could say, okay.
But what's the disadvantage is what I'm saying. Why wouldn't you have, a fork of, it's not, excuse my metaphors, but a fork of the Hashgraph for the Bank of England. So I've just done a video on a technology called Zinfin. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. And they have two states. So they have the private state and they have the public state. So for example, you could have the public state where you would have the world reserve currency where all people can see it. And then you'd have the private state. And in the private state, you'd have the United Kingdom pound. I don't know why you wouldn't have that. I can't think of a use case where but then I'm not as intelligent as you are.
No. I think it might be my lack of imagination, but I have a fundamental political belief. I don't believe national currencies should be privatized, but it doesn't matter what I believe.
It wouldn't be though.
They won't.
It wouldn't be privatized though. Well, where do you draw the line with Hedera Hashgraph? Because if the NHS start doing all of their informational transactions, their records, our GP stuff, all on Hedera Hashgraph, does that mean that the NHS is then, it's not privatized, the NHS isn't privatized, nor is the information that's being stored on the Hedera Hashgraph, because it's just the software?
No. Okay.
Governments and private companies both use Microsoft Word.
Yes. Again, I am not a finance expert,
no.
I'm not an economist, but I know so much that there's a difference between a medical record and a pound note.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think there's this whole idea of the protection of monetary stability. This is extremely important because if you can see
you get this wrong, it could go bad fast.
That go this wrong. So again, as somebody who's not a fan of this told me a long time ago, he says, well, if you find a country that is adopting Bitcoin, for example, then it's because they've either been naughty, they've either been naughty and printing money, or there are other problems. They've been taking it themselves.
There's a problem. There's uncertainty and there's volatility.
You can imagine, of course, it could be a solution
Venezuela,
for ordinary people to basically gain access
circumvent the If it was a Weimar Republic, they'd be using Bitcoin. They'd be using the Bitcoin.
So if a country's monetary system works, I don't see any reason to privatize it because you want it independent. Now, obviously, my imagination is not very great in this, but I could think about scenarios where you could have the underlying layer be independent from the monetary system, and there could be a digital dollar or pound on top of any of or multiple layer one. I can see that. But
that's what I see too. I see it on 2 or 3 different layer 1 projects.
Yes. But the point is,
because it's just the operating system.
And it might just be that Hedera's Hashgraph is efficient enough for that to work and stable enough. The point is here, you can't afford to mess around with it. That's the point.
No.
Things you can't.
But you can't stand still either, though. We can't do nothing.
No, that's right.
The answer is not do nothing.
No. And it's absolutely clear what seems to be the consensus is that the reason why all the central banks in the world are now thinking about central bank digital currencies is exactly because Mark Zuckerberg said we're going to have the Libra.
Yeah.
And that spurred the
everyone sat
because if there's anything, I have nothing against Facebook. I'm on Facebook and WhatsApp, but I don't think Zuckerberg with his super majority shares should decide about private money.
No. And not just that, an elected individual, it's a dictatorship of money. It doesn't, and that's no reflection on him, it doesn't matter. It couldn't be Lehman, it couldn't be Mance, it couldn't be me.
I actually believe even that social data and social networks, the data produced there are now so important that even that should not be privatized. And also because I'm an Apple fan, of course.
Yes.
I really do think that there needs to be some sort of oversight over our data.
Yes.
Because it's getting too scary.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I recently read, I don't know if you saw, I've done a book review of The Four. I don't know if you've read that by Professor Galloway.
I've seen all of that. I haven't read that.
Right, and he's just written a new book, and it's called it's about COVID and coming out of COVID.
Yes,
and how it's an opportunity from dilemma. And Professor Galloway talks a lot, and I really like it because I've read a lot of business books, if you like, in inverted commas. And what I like about his is that he's critical and quite honest of the big four, Facebook, Google, Apple, and Amazon, and the way that they treat data. And the data is seen, it is now the new oil. It's that data is actually the oil rush. That's the gold rush. It is for people's data and how the companies treat that. Now, I think that there's no way of dealing with that without some privatization, in that the companies do very well what they do, but there needs to be more regulation. And he actually raises the question in his new book, which I'm literally in the middle of now. Are they too big? Is it too late for regulatory?
Yeah, so it's really a complicated issue, and we may actually in the near future have an academic workshop here on that topic. The point is that I think the point is here that it's always easy. So fundamentally, I believe that these platforms have done something extremely interesting, and so you could look at, okay, despite all the negative things, how on earth could we do most things now? Like,
yeah, without their help.
I just look at my own work. Google Scholar. I go on Google Scholar regularly, and I tell my students when they're going to do a master's dissertation, you want to just go there and search, and you can find.
It's not even a question. Just
It's so. I mean, when I did my PhD, I had to go and talk to a librarian and say, "Can you please order photocopies of these articles?"
Yes.
It was ridiculous. So
printing photos. I mean, just remember that.
I mean, so the point is there. I think it's completely beside the point when people start bashing all of these. Of course, they have a lot of power, but the point is there, you have to look at it in perspective.
Yes, and the improvement as well. The positive.
Like I would say, even Facebook, no matter how much trouble I think it might have caused in the American election and Brexit and all, like if you look on balance, I on balance think we should appreciate that they actually do very interesting things.
Yes.
Now the point is there that when I would criticize them, they would be on the basis of understanding that I don't want them to go away. So the fundamental problem we have has been discussed in the media and in the academia. So how would you regulate them? The problem you have is when you normally regulate any kind of utility company, you make it completely transparent what it does and how it makes its money, then you force it to only price its services in a certain way.
Yeah.
The point is that if you want to regulate Google that way, you would force Google to be completely transparent about their page rank, so they couldn't fiddle with it. Yes. And that would then allow any hacker in the world to completely re-engineer and completely circumvent it.
I mean, what's incredible is the Monopolies Commission haven't. I think one of the points that Professor Galloway raises is that they haven't broken. Like the Monopolies Commission aren't even that I'm aware of are even talking about breaking up the likes of Facebook, who are now buying out all the competition, with WhatsApp and Instagram.
They're more aware of. I think.
At what point? How much do they have to? What more do they have to do before?
Yes. I think the key thing that increasing regulators are doing is, if a large platform wants to buy a small company, you have to see what kind of data that this small company can add, and therefore add to the predictive power. But it's a really
and the net total of the whole thing.
I mean, so in The Economist, they argued, which I would say I agree with, is, so let's imagine you split up Google, and whichever mini Google gets DeepMind just up the road here, they would have a head start.
Of course.
Because they have all.
Who gets which bit?
Yeah, who gets what bit? And the point is, they wouldn't be lumbered with all of the bits that might.
That doesn't mean we shouldn't try, though. It just.
I don't know. I'm not settled on it. So the point is here. The first thing you need to look at is how can you utilize existing regulatory regimes. And again, I'm not an expert on
the least invasive kind of solution. You could use
existing regulations to ensure that they are not either having monopolistic behavior or customer harm or consumer harm. Those are the two main things.
I completely get. That's a very fair point, which is, is the damage actually being done, and can we see evidence of that? Because just because there's a monopoly doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. The NHS has a monopoly.
Yeah. And the point is there, so you can also say, okay, maybe they have misbehaved, and maybe they have outcompeted some. But you could also say, if you look at it from a disruptive point of view, well, that could be an advantage, or this. You have to be very careful before you just say, before you stifle things. The point is here, the platforms are rapidly maturing, so it's obvious it's going to be a bigger item. And as I would always say, if the electorate of the UK was knocking down politicians' doors saying, "We want you to do something about it," something would be done.
Yes.
Nobody's doing that.
It's absolutely correct, yeah.
Facebook started saying, well, maybe we want to withdraw from Europe. And people think, where am I going to do my daily kick? So,
for me, they've gone too far there, because I think that it's quite short-sighted and arrogant, because in capitalism, someone will always fill that void. There'll be a solution. We won't go back to the dark ages.
No.
So to suggest there'll be 6 months of people moaning, and then someone will quite quickly.
Well, some people are saying on Facebook are saying, oh, it'll be nice. We'll have a little break. We'll have a little break.
Yeah.
So I think you have to like, so my wife runs a small business doing events and stuff, and for her, like you could say, like these. So
it must be fantastic, because she can reach her
fundamental understanding of digital transformation. I'm going to give you something for free here.
Okay, thank you.
So in my humble experience through 30 years, when you digitize things and have digital innovation instead of in the physical world, what tends to happen when it's sort of internet based, it just clarifies things. It pushes things from the middle out to the edges.
Okay.
So you can say, in a good old-fashioned world of physical interaction, physical competition, you could have somebody who could just look to America and say, oh, they have supermarkets there. Oh, I'm going to open a supermarket. Fantastic. They can hide in a country, in a small country like Denmark, only speaking Danish, start whatever, copy whatever. Like in Germany, they've had a startup very successful, copy all these services and be successful in Germany. The point is, increasingly you can't hide. It's increasingly global competition. So what happens is exactly the difference between being the top and number 2 on the App Store. So this is Brynjolfsson McAfee's book, The Second Machine Age, goes in great detail in saying, if you're the top navigation app and you're free, you're called Waze. Why would anybody buy TomTom, which might be number 2? Yeah. Why would you spend £89 on buying TomTom?
You wouldn't. Yeah.
It's cheap. It's cheaper to buy a TomTom, it's the number one is vastly better.
Yes.
And so the point is that it clarifies things, so you can be a tiny app developer. You're probably never going to make any money from it, maybe a little bit, or you're on the other extreme. You're the one owning the platform.
It becomes polar, doesn't it?
Completely polarized.
Yes.
But the point is there. So both are good.
Yeah.
So lots of small companies can. In Vietnam, I bought these 2 hand crocheted piglets for my daughter when she was very young. Like, you cannot imagine the marketing company in any company in the West come up with an idea that would be feasible financially.
Yeah.
I paid £50 for these 2 things. They were sent directly from Vietnam. I could only find that because of Etsy.
Yes.
So you could. It has created new value chains
and a global market.
And global marketplaces, and
yeah.
very, very interesting.
Yes.
The point is there, of course, as they turn into utility companies, we need to keep track that they are not just extracting rent and setting the price their own way. Like.
Yes. And that's where we run into trouble.
We need to regulate, but when that is not up to me.
No. We touched on very, very briefly, I'll wrap up because I know how busy you are, and thank you so much for all your time. It's been very, very interesting for me personally, and I know it will be interesting to a lot of our viewers too. NFTs, so obviously non-fungible tokens,
yes.
Going to be an absolutely massive thing, I think.
Yes.
And I think they're going to play a much larger part in what cryptographic technology was supposed to be. Yeah. I think when Satoshi set out his stall and said, we're going to peer-to-peer and it's going to be decentralized and so on and so forth, I believe will facilitate a future that was supposed to be what Bitcoin was supposed to be at the beginning. And what I mean by that is that people will be able to go on the internet, and Justin Bieber the next Justin Bieber will be able to create videos on a platform and say, I'm selling 10 NFTs, and for that you can have 10% of my future earnings, or whatever it may be. It'll be sort of like GoFundMe and YouTube, have a baby, and it'll be a fantastic platform. So there'll be a lot more peer-to-peer interaction because it takes away it's trustless, like Lehman talks about a lot. It's trustless, which is fantastic, and property transactions, like you alluded to earlier. So with all that in mind, what are your thoughts on NFTs versus or away from cryptographic technology? Just the NFT section, which is in its infancy, in an industry that's in its infancy. Do you foresee anything when you're teaching, when you're considering, when you're reflecting about NFTs?
So first of all, blockchain is not trustless.
No, that's fair.
So there is a trust paradigm. So let's imagine there's 5 companies, and we're going to work together. And we have a blockchain arrangement, a distributed ledger. So we're all using the Hashgraph. So we then say to each other, we can trust each other. The point is here, if all we're engaged in are things that are born on the consensus protocol. So the reason why Bitcoin is relatively trustless is because all Bitcoin are born by the consensus protocol and stay on Bitcoin forever. So, but if we're going to link any real world phenomena to a token, we have to trust each other enough that we are not cheating when we're on board.
Right, okay.
So, and this is where then you have to know enough about each other's operations, or you have to trust each other enough to say, if we ever find out that you've been cheating, it'll be so bad for your reputation.
The consequences are...
So this is important. So it is trust enhancing. It is not trustless.
Why is it trust enhancing and not trustless? Can you give me a real world example of the 5 companies? So what are the 5 businesses doing, and where does the trust come in? So how can you cheat?
Let's take the hypothetical example of my father-in-law's egg farm in Romania.
Okay.
This hypothetical example, it's highly hypothetical,
that
he is then by law required to spray paint the date of birth of each egg.
Yes.
But there's not anybody standing next to him. Of course, he's a very honorable person, so he sprays his eggs.
Yes.
But there's nobody checking. He could choose to spray them
now,
just before he sells them.
The way in that example you make that trustless is that I, as a private company working for the government, create a machine that stamps the eggs. It knows that it stamped an egg, it knows what it stamped on the egg, and it puts that on the Hashgraph.
Yeah.
And that is how you take away.
He's the guy putting the egg.
So I don't need to know your hypothetical father-in-law to know that he's put the hypothetical date on the hypothetical egg.
So one of our visiting fellows, Gary Heilman, who is also a head of research at blockchain.com, he was asked to help with exactly the problem of avoiding the mad cow debacle again. So they wanted to tattoo the ears of the cow so you can follow from birth to beef.
Yes.
And the whole point is there, you can follow the whole process once the token is put in. The problem is you still need to trust that the farmer, like you need to trust that this cow came from that farm and is tattooed at that point.
Yes.
And so the point is that all you need is, of course, a system in place by which you can rest assured that you largely believe it's okay, and there's so much punishment if you're found out, or indeed a likelihood of you being found out if you don't do.
I understand. Yeah, there's companies tracking wine, isn't there, on Hedera Hashgraph? Yeah, but there has to at the very birth there has to be some trust that the wine is the decent stuff in the first place.
Yeah. So this is a typical example of any digital technology. It never exists in a vacuum. It always exists in a situation, a context populated by institutions.
Yeah.
So the only reason why you can take your iPhone and download an app and do stuff is not because Apple made the apps available to you. It's all because you know how to use the iPhone. So it's always much more complex.
And I've been able to charge my phone.
And you can charge
because
your phone.
The hotel had sockets.
All of this, and if there hadn't been ordinary phones, the iPhone would never have worked. People just looked at it and say, what do we do?
Yes.
So the point is here, you can say that's why the best use cases are where there are already existing institutional arrangements that know how to do these things.
Yeah.
And they just enhance a little bit their trustworthiness. But they trusted each other before, now they're trusting each other even more.
Yeah.
The second point I want to say is that Bitcoins are non-fungible tokens. A Bitcoin is a non-fungible token. Fungibility basically just means that you have a £10 note, I nick it from you, you report that to your insurance company, the insurance company says, are you happy with this £10 note? You said, yeah, I don't care what the serial number is.
Yes.
When in proper investment companies, they invest in clean Bitcoin that haven't been engaged in naughty activity.
Yes.
So Bitcoins are non-fungible. That's not what we mean by a non-fungible token.
No. But yeah, in the true sense of the word,
the essence of any distributed ledger, unless you have Zcash or Monero where you tumble them and they become truly anonymous, is that the tokens can be tracked. Each token has a number, and you can check
all the way
back to when it was born.
Which will be interesting because if, for example, the CIA raid a Taliban compound and it turns out that they've got a Bitcoin wallet, and it's proven that some of these Bitcoins were paid for arms that kill people or drugs or whatever, would you want to own that Bitcoin because you know where the £10 note has been, and that's going to be really interesting in the future.
So it's like handling stolen
goods. And where does that stop becoming a thing? Or if some Bitcoins are made from the sale of child pornography, is that a Bitcoin that you'd want to own?
So of course.
And there's a really interesting philosophical, psychological question there.
In the fishing towns near where I grew up, they would always say, fish smells, money doesn't. Money doesn't smell, the fish smells.
Well, that's about to change because
now
Bitcoin's got a history.
Exactly.
Everywhere it's been is written on the £10 note. Yeah.
And apparently there's all sorts of stuff you can find, legal substances you can find when you scan
on a £10 note, yeah,
note,
yes.
or tube seats, or
or all that stuff.
Yeah.
And now you're going to be able to do that with currency.
Yeah. So the point is there. So in terms of NFTs, so I was just making as partly a flippant point about Bitcoin being non-fungible tokens.
Yes.
But the point is there. So the utopian and dystopian idea is, of course, that you can track things you normally couldn't track. And if you can track things you couldn't track before, then you can have secondary markets. Indeed, TradeLens, which is a consortium proof of stake blockchain that is really based on keeping track of the content of containers, whether the content of a container has been, if it's flowers from East Africa, has it been sprayed against bugs, all of these things. To
opened on the journey, and all that stuff.
And you can then use that to secure against trade finance. So the point is, and so these...
And the insurance as well.
Insurance. So these certificates can make secondary markets that didn't exist before.
Yes.
So of course this opens up fantastic opportunities. But again, the dystopian notion is if we don't have proper oversight and guidance in what we then do with this, if we just turn out to be as stupid as we tend to be in the past, we can do all sorts of stuff.
Yes. It can just be manipulated like everything else. Yeah.
It can just be new Ponzi schemes, all sorts of things on top.
It makes the bad stuff more efficient too.
It does.
Which is compounding against us. Okay.
And so the point is there that to have any of these systems without any oversight is crazy. But again, in any initial stage, don't judge anything from what happens in the Wild West.
Of course.
Of course it's not.
That's a good way of putting it.
And you can say, if you look at the NFT, the arts world, so it's not a coincidence that Beeple was the one who scored the highest on this.
Yeah.
He had a long history for 13 years. He's been doing digital art every day.
Yeah.
So it's like he had something to sell.
Yes.
And so I think the idea of secondary markets, I think we have several of my students here are now doing projects with blockchain and arts world. The idea that artists traditionally never had any, it was only Damien Hirst and a few others that Banksy that had any secondary income.
Yes.
Like any income from secondary markets. Normally you would sell it to somebody and they would resell it.
Then it's in the ether. It's gone. So that's going to open up a whole second and third layer market.
And like any cultural product, of course you can give artists a way of keeping some contractual obligations money flowing back. I think so. I like that very much.
Yes, me too.
I would hate having to pay 2p every time I take a sip of this water bottle. I mean, the point is, or just to enter my door.
Depends how many sips you want to take, because there's a penny a page with reading books, and if you get halfway through and don't like it, then you save money. And if you read it all the way through, then you've only had to pay.
But so this is the point. There was
fractional ownership and
that's right. Of course. The point is here, if you look at the experiment in the insurance business where they would put a sensor, GPS in your car, and you would only pay according to the risk you subjected yourself to, it was completely a failure because people ended up always paying more. And the only segment it works for is young men under 25, where the insurance premium
they assume that they're all driving 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, and so for them there's a huge financial benefit of being recorded.
Yes.
The point is
that for everyone else it's worse,
So you could say, the problem you have is when the power tips in these multi-sided relationships. So you could say, well, if I take the 23andMe genetic test and give that to my insurance company or for my life insurance, I might get a cheaper premium. Fantastic. Isn't that fantastic, Max says?
Yes.
Yes, it is, I say. Until that point where you suddenly will not get an insurance unless you do it. So the insurance companies can filter out all the ones with genetic mistakes.
Yes.
All the ones who have that gene that means if you're a woman, you're 87% likely to have breast cancer.
Yeah.
And so if you want to learn about that, read Yuval Harari's book, Homo Deus.
Right, okay.
This goes through in great detail how we need to be very careful because some decisions have real moral dilemmas that we need to come across.
And serious consequences too.
Very serious.
The one you've raised there, if you wouldn't be able to get insurance, it would just be...
exactly. So the point is here, and
the people who need it can't get it.
Exactly.
Not the people who can.
So this is political.
Yes,
this
really,
is
really political.
And you saw that in Obamacare already.
Yeah.
The problems, if you have existing conditions, the NHS cannot say, you have an existing condition, I will no longer treat you.
It's not our problem.
That's the whole idea of the NHS.
Yes.
You have a condition, you need to be treated.
Yeah. Do you own any NFTs?
I don't own any NFTs. I have a little bit of crypto.
Right.
My claim to fame is I bought Bitcoin in 2011.
Wow.
And I sold it because,
At a massive profit or no profit?
No, very little profit.
Very little profit.
If I had kept it,
yes,
I wouldn't know where it was. That's the point.
That'd be worse. That'd be more frustrating.
I wouldn't know where it was.
Yeah, yeah.
When I did the course in 2018, it was £7,000. I thought for Bitcoin. I thought crazy. I didn't buy anything then.
No.
If I'd bought it, I would have spent all the years looking at the exchange rate. I'm an obsessive person.
Right, okay, yeah, so once you start...
And I don't, I mean, so for me...
Inflation aside, does Bitcoin get to is it more likely to go to 1 million or a zero?
I don't know. What I would say is it's either or.
That's very true.
Yes.
Do you think so? You think it's that binary? You think it's...
Well, it's not to 1 million. I don't know how much it can go, because the point is every time a new layer comes up with more use cases, you could say the more it becomes digital gold, and it maybe is only...
It bolsters.
Yeah. I think the idea of 1 million, it's really just based on that this is really all...
It's people doing big numbers, isn't it? There's this many people in the world, there's this many Bitcoin times them, and
But so I don't know what it's going to go to, but I think... So what you can say is what I would attribute Garrick Heilman saying, it has never been zero since it started. Like whatever it has been, it's never gone to zero.
True.
Yeah.
But so were Enron stocks, you know. So, you know, and they went to zero.
And
so
you could also argue this is the.
I'm not saying that Bitcoin's a scam, but I just think that just because it's never been to zero before doesn't mean it couldn't go to zero tomorrow.
No, there is no reason why it wouldn't go to zero at all. At all. But you could say, and the argument, the thought experiment is, let's imagine that everybody in the world completely loses faith in Bitcoin before we're done mining them all.
Yes.
And there's only one left to believe in it. That one person, it's probably a he. There'll probably be one Bitcoin maximalist holding on,
yeah.
And this person, he would have a field day. He would be able to mine all the remaining coins very quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
so, and if
to what end?
It doesn't have to be a little bit of it. So the point is for me, it's completely pointless to speculate.
That's fair, yeah.
I have a little bit of Bitcoin just to see, and then I have a little bit of H-bar because I believe in it. That's it.
Of course,
I don't know anything else.
You don't know.
For years, this is literally, I bought those as we joined. I thought I have to have skin in the game.
Of course, yeah.
But it's for me, it's
a token.
If I was interested in money, I would be somewhere else. I would work in the city and make more money than I do now.
Yeah, of course.
I make very little money.
Of course. Okay, thank you ever so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks. It's been an absolute pleasure. No, it's been an absolute pleasure for me, and I can't wait to see what LSE are doing in the future with these use cases that you can't talk about. I'd love to see that. So please let us know when we can talk about it, and maybe I could come back and interview you about some of them and meet some of the people. That'd be really interesting. Dr. Sørensen, thank you ever so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed that, guys. I certainly did. It's been a really, really fun day, and I've learned so much being here. As always, thanks ever so much for watching. I'll see you soon.